that made that movie, that made Everything Everywhere All at Once. Do you think that could have implications for the kinds of movies that get made?
I would hope so. Again, we do know A24 has a great reputation. They had a great reputation before Everything Everywhere All at Once. But yes, now, and I think also because of the way they handled their campaign, they didn't campaign like a typical studio. They didn't go out and pay for expensive consultants and all that kind of stuff. They just sort of said, hey, we made a great film. Let's send these filmmakers out. Let's send the cast and crew out, let them kind of speak for the film and rep it themselves. And there's a great opportunity there if you've got a strong title that you can let the people that made it put it out in the world, let them go out and support that. And if that continues to happen on the indie side and maybe even on the studio side as well, then maybe we'll see fewer of the, kind of stereotypical blockbuster films, and we'll get some more interesting titles out there. So that's actually hopeful and exciting in that respect.
Yeah. Well, I know your column, which is terrific. And as I mentioned, it's on WVXU.org now. I encourage everyone to check it out and read it. One of the things you start with is this idea of getting people back into movie theaters. I know that was a theme during the Oscars last night. That's something that a lot of folks who are involved in the movie industry want to see for a bunch of different reasons. I have to admit, I'm one of those people who's been really slow to go back, and I love movies. What do you think it's going to take to make scaredy cats like me get back into the movie theaters?
I wish I had a simple answer to that. Because again, I understand the concern and the struggle with making your way back into the theaters. It took me a while as well as a critic, and we've talked about this off air. I'm fortunate enough that I can go during off peak times, but I will say that again, I've been to a couple of festivals now here recently, and I've been in crowded theaters again with people. I love that experience. I have gotten over some of the discomfort that I've had with that. Festivals will do that for you. But again, outside of the festival experience, how do we get people back on a daily and a weekly basis? I think is the real question. And it's going to be about the films. You have to find and create great films, great opportunities for stars to, showcase their talents and, the imagination of those filmmakers that will inspire us to come back. And if the film is big and crazy and zany enough, then we'll start to break down some of those barriers that we've built up over the last few years. But I can understand people that need a little more time for that.
Mm-hmm.
And again, we've also gotten used to the idea that we can just watch stuff. You can wait. The windows have shrunk in terms of exhibition. You're going to be able to see it at home. But the home experience is not the same thing. And I think we all know that.
Yeah.
We all do. So let's hope that those memories of what it was like to be in a theater with your friends, seeing a great film, having a good laugh, sharing that communal laugh and joy and passion for the art form will be enough to bring us all back.
Yeah. I want to remind our listeners we're talking about new movie releases for spring and summer with film critic T.T. Stern-Enzi. You can join the conversation by calling 513-419-7100 or emailing talk@wvxu.org. So let's get into these new movies. One of the ones that you write about in your column is 1001. We actually have a portion of the trailer that we can play right now.
Tell me more about your foster mother. You like her? Would it make you feel better if you came and stayed with me?
Yeah.
All right, we're gonna go to Harlem, where I grew up at. The city had him. He's not supposed to be with me.
Can't you get locked up for
Not
that?
if you keep it to yourself.
Where's my dad at?
He's gone. But you wouldn't have liked him anyway. I got somebody else in mind.
So powerful. Tell us a little bit about this movie.
This is a title, again, early festival season. You've got the Sundance has already come and gone. It's given us some interesting titles like this. This is a story of a woman whose son ends up in foster care, and she decides to take him and start a life and sort of, recreate their lives together. Obviously, it's a very powerful kind of idea, but I love the idea that, again, this played at a festival like Sundance, and now it's going to be released later this month, which is pretty fast for a title like this. You would think that something, on the indie side, it's going to take a little longer to find an audience. That's not the case at all.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm excited that, again, we're seeing studios and even smaller indie outlets that are kind of saying, yeah, let's take a chance on some of these stories and let's really get them out in theaters early. We don't have to wait for award season or something like that. Let's get them out. Let's make sure people get the chance to see them. And I was really excited to be able to promote this as part of this segment in particular, because this is a title that's probably going to get lost in a lot of the other bigger titles that we're going to be talking about as part of this segment. But I wanted to make sure to let people know you don't have to lose sight of some of these stories. They can be just as powerful and just as meaningful and can stand up in their own ways to the big blockbuster titles.
Yeah, it sounds like such a powerful story. I mean, it's relevant to so many people, and it's set in New York, but it's not this typical kind of love letter to New York that so many New York indie films seem to be.
Yeah, it feels like it's going to have a grittier, emotional, family-driven kind of narrative to it. And yeah, I feel like, we were talking about what's going to bring people out into theaters. Maybe every once in a while it is a title that is about family, and it's about trying to deal with the difficulties of keeping a family together. We can all kind of know and understand that experience. And yeah, maybe to see that on the big screen will, kind of take us back to our own experiences, on a personal level.
Yeah. You also have Air listed in your column, and it has Matt Damon and Ben Affleck. Boy, they've been busy, haven't they? They're in several of the movies you've listed in your column.
They have been very busy. I have loved the idea of how they've been promoting this film because, based on the name and the little bit of the trailer that people have seen, we know it's about Nike and Michael Jordan, but they have done an amazing job of letting us know that we will probably not really see someone playing Michael Jordan in this film. It is going to be sort of that behind the scenes, what were the business issues and decisions and the meetings that were taking place that led up to Nike saying, okay, yeah, we're going to give you a shoe line that will become the biggest shoe line of all time.
Yeah, we have a little bit of audio from the trailer for this movie, too.
You ask me what I do here. This is what I do. I find you players, and I feel it this time. Okay, it's risky. When you were selling sneakers out of the back of your Plymouth, that was risky. Don't change that now.
For a rookie?
Yes.
Who's never set foot on an NBA court.
That's the literal definition of rookie. Yeah.
What's the plan?
We build a shoe line around just him. I need the greatest basketball shoe that's ever been made.
Who's the player?
Michael Jordan.
Just the energy in that clip. I mean, my goodness.
I have had the biggest smile on my face throughout the entire time that they've been promoting this film, because I've got to admit, I'm a North Carolinian. So Michael Jordan, he's always going to be my GOAT. I cannot wait to see this film.
Yeah. Well, we will continue this conversation in just a moment, and later in the program, we'll talk about the resurgence of the role-playing game Dungeons & Dragons. This is Cincinnati Edition.
Support comes from Council on Aging, your connection to the wide variety of programs, services, and resources available to older adults and caregivers in the community with a focus on independent living. Learn more at 513-721-1025 or helpforseniors.org. That's help, the numeral 4, seniors.org. Support for WVXU and WMUB comes from listeners like you and from the Kentucky Cabinet for Health and Family Services and its Department for Public Health, urging everyone to stay up to date with recommended vaccines. For more information, visit chfs.ky.gov/agencies/DPH.
I'm Steve Inskeep. Around the world,
our co-host Leila Fadel has been reporting from Ukraine.
In your community,
workers are unionizing in fields where they haven't always had a big presence.
And farther afield,
think really far, like out of this world.
5 and liftoff of Artemis 1.
Morning Edition from NPR News takes you wherever the story is. Listen every weekday.
With host Marianne Zalesnik on 91.7 WVXU.
Support comes from the Cincinnati Symphony Orchestra presenting The Mermaid, March 17th and 18th at Music Hall. You can experience the thrilling music of Mendelssohn and Zemlinsky inspired by mermaid tales. Violinist Simone Lamsma returns to perform Korngold's gorgeously cinematic violin concerto. Tickets at cincinnatysymphony.org. Season sponsor Western and Southern.
Support for Cincinnati Edition comes from the Johnson Foundation, a private grant-making foundation committed to creating a more vibrant urban core through community development and civic engagement. More information at johnson-foundation.org.
This is Cincinnati Edition on 91.7 WVXU. I'm Lucy May. We continue our conversation about new movie releases for spring and summer with film critic T.T. Stern-Enzi. You can join the conversation by calling 513-419-7100 or emailing talk@wvxu.org. T.T., you have so many great movies in this column, which again, I urge everyone to read on WVXU.org. I really was interested in Renfield. Had not heard about this, but you had me at Nicolas Cage as Dracula. Talk to us about this movie.
Well, you can't talk about the idea of Nicolas Cage as Dracula without talking about the fact that, again, I believe it was in the early 90s, he was in Vampire's Kiss. Yeah. And, this was early Nick Cage before, he blew up, before the Oscar nomination and the win. And he was just always this really kind of fun, edgy, you weren't exactly sure what he was going to do kind of presence on screen. And now he's become, again, this really iconic figure for exactly those kinds of things and those kinds of roles. And to imagine him playing Dracula when, in theory, he's not the lead of this film. It's really Renfield, who's his assistant. Nicholas Hoult is playing him. I've been watching the trailers for this, and the same thought keeps cropping up in my head. I'm like, I want to see the film, but I want to see Nicolas Cage.
Right. Yeah. And I just imagine he's going to be chewing up the scenery with those big old fangs whenever he's in it.
You gotta love it. It's gonna. I feel like it's gonna be a real blast and a lot of fun. And honestly, again, I think the fun is what we are going to be looking for this summer. I really do believe that, it's going to be that kind of zany spirit that's going to, we're going to need it and we're going to feed into it.
Yes, I could use some zany fun. You also have Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse on your list. I wanted to talk to you about this. I thought the original was amazing. Such a great story, but also so fun to watch, such inventive animation. Talk to us about what you're expecting from this.
Yeah, I mean, I was excited about this one. Again, for anyone who knows me as a critic or just as a person in general, I'm sort of a comic book nerd. I grew up reading comics. I was dying for one of my kids to get into comic books when they were growing up. And fortunately, my youngest did for a little bit. So we've enjoyed that. But what I love about the Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse sort of series and what they're doing here is they're taking the Spider-Man character and they're sort of saying, okay, we are reimagining who this character is. It's not Peter Parker. The Miles Morales character is a really different spin. Caught us at a time when comics and comic creators were kind of thinking outside the box about these legacy characters in the first place. And they have now really figured out a way to treat Miles as if he's as much of a legacy character as Peter Parker. Mm-hmm. So to know that you're going to get his story and, again, his continuing adventures as he's trying to figure out who he is or who and what it means to be Spider-Man is really exciting. And this is a 2-part film, too. I think a lot of people probably need to hear that. You're going to see this now, but they've already kind of let us know that there's going to be a follow-up to this story. So just go into it, be ready. And if it works as well as the first one did with the different animation styles and all that, I think it's going to really kind of pull people in and leave us with enough of a cliffhanger that we're going to be really eager to see where they follow, how they finish it all off.
Yeah, the kind of movie you'll want to see on a big screen.
You definitely want to see it on a big screen.
Yeah. I want to talk to you also about The Blackening. If I understand correctly, this is the one on your list that you've already seen. So yes. No spoiler alerts, but I love this concept. Talk to us about this movie. And I guess I also wonder, did Get Out help pave the way for a film like this?
That's an interesting question. I think, yes, I would say starting off, yes, I believe Get Out probably did kind of open the door for this a little bit. Although the funny thing here is this is definitely more of kind of an almost outrageous sketch comedy kind of approach. So it's not necessarily trying to completely go into, a social critique and those kinds of things. But it does sort of set up the notion you've got a group of friends who have known each other since college. They get together, they go to, an Airbnb kind of cabin style adventure together. They're all Black, and they find themselves in a horror film or a horror film scenario, which of course leads them to question, well, which one of us is going to die first? Because we all know the horror trope about, the Black character being the first one to die. We're all Black. So how does that work in this case? Tim Story, who directed Barbershop and, two of the three Fantastic Four films that didn't quite necessarily go as well as Marvel and Fox would have wanted, he's helming this. And he's, again, with Barbershop, he's shown he's got a great way with humor. I'm excited to have seen this in a big theater at a film festival with lots of people. The audiences went crazy for it when I saw it in Toronto. I think audiences are going to have a lot of fun with it when it comes out. And yeah, again, I keep saying this. I really believe it. Fun.
Yeah. I was so glad to see Jay Farrow as part of this cast too, because I've missed him. Since he's left Saturday Night Live, it's going to be great to see him on the big screen.
It will, because in my case, I'm tired of watching YouTube clips of him doing impersonations. And I'm saying that in the best possible way, because I've gone down that rabbit hole quite a bit. So it's a lot. It's far more exciting to me to know that, yes, I'm going to get to see him on screen and really love what he does there.
Yeah. Talk to us too about Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny. This is one of those big blockbuster type typical summer movies. I have to say, I was so relieved that Phoebe Waller-Bridge is not the love interest for Harrison Ford. I was so afraid that it was going to be, get this, fun young woman. And so thank goodness for that. But tell us a little bit about the premise of this film.
I'm honestly trying to stay away from learning as much as I can about this film going into it. I was not a huge fan of the last installment, the Crystal Skull thing. Which
kind of jumped the shark a little bit.
That's what I'm going to stick with calling it. It was the Crystal Skull thing.
Right.
But what has happened for me over the time since that film is, we've now seen Harrison Ford in the Apple TV series Shrinking doing comedy and doing sort of his usual gruff, almost straight man kind of role. But it reminded me of how much I've actually enjoyed him and missed him as a screen presence. So I am looking forward to seeing what they do with this. I'm hoping it's going to be the last one. They had the opportunity, honestly, 2 films back to let that be the trilogy, let that end it all. But I mean, he still is a really active and fun and engaging presence. So I'm kind of like, I'm willing to reinvest in him enough if this is going to be the last one. And this should be the last one.
Yeah, that's fair. Well, the last movie I want to talk to you about is Oppenheimer. Tell us the premise of this movie. It seems so important right now with the time we're living in with the war in Ukraine. Talk to us about Oppenheimer.
Right. This is going to be a powerful film. It's it's looking at the creation of the atomic bomb and the team behind it. And it's obviously, we're getting this from Christopher Nolan, who over the course of his career has always found really interesting ways of kind of exploring really fascinating, almost mind-bending kinds of narratives. This one doesn't necessarily feel like it has to be as mind-bending as he's done in the past, but I think it's going to be far more important. And from what I've heard in terms of the special effects, they've talked about the idea that they did not want to use CGI to create that experience of the first atomic explosion. So in my mind, I'm kind of going into it wondering, okay, this guy has all of these ideas and tricks up his sleeve. What is he going to give us to make us feel the power of that particular moment and the destructive nature of it all?
Well, he seems to be one of those directors who just looks at the world a little differently. Would you agree with that?
I think he definitely does. And again, I think he's the perfect choice for this. But I would also say, too, and I think I mentioned in the piece, there's a really large and eclectic cast that he's bringing together to make this film, too. And the reason why, especially this film made this list, is I honestly believe we're coming off of, the 95th Oscars. I really feel like if he hits this one on all of the cylinders that we would expect him to, we'll be talking about Oppenheimer at the end of the year.
Well, and that brings us back to the Oscars where we started our conversation. Navalny won an Oscar last night. It's also a film that's very topical based on what's happening in Ukraine. Talk to us about, the context that film comes into it with the Oscars last night. I know there was a pretty emotional acceptance speech that.
There was a pretty powerful moment last night. And as someone who sat and watched the award show with his Oscar ballot, this is one that I got wrong. But in hindsight, I'm kind of kicking myself because the narrative was really there for the entire time for this for this film to win. Again, we know what's going on in the Ukraine right now. Navalny is jailed for being an outspoken member of the Russian society who's sort of saying, we as a country and a society are doing wrong in the world. So to recognize that film on that stage last night and to have his wife and kids there was an incredibly powerful moment. This was a film, as a matter of fact, when it was on its festival run last year, I tried my best to try to bring this in for the Over the Rhine International Film Festival, and we weren't able to get it. But I think the programmers and we all knew that it was a powerful film on the circuit. And yes, obviously last night it was sort of the culmination of all of that power. And again, the festivals that were able to bring it in, gave it a lot of love. It got a lot of support along the way. And CNN, good for them for, kind of standing behind this and pitching it. And again, making sure that it's the campaigns and everything like that are not necessarily what wins awards. At the end of the day, you have to have a powerful film. You have to have a film that works, that has meaning, or has resonance in a particular moment. And this one, probably more so than all of the other films in the documentary category, was a film of the moment.
Well, I've been talking with film critic T.T. Stern-Enzi, who's going to stick around for our next conversation. Thanks for sticking around, T.T.
I'm really excited about this.
Up next, as fans await the new Dungeons & Dragons movie, we'll talk about why the role-playing game is seeing a resurgence. This is Cincinnati Edition.
Support comes from Overbeck Auto Services, maintaining, diagnosing, and repairing vehicles since 1976. Owned and operated by the host of the long-running show, Steve Overbeck's Auto Line. Overbeck is a full-service repair and maintenance shop for all makes and models, including hybrid and electric vehicles, in Madisonville and Amelia. More at overbeckauto.com.
Support comes from Bova Furniture. Since 1985, Bova's 20,000 square foot showroom has served the tri-state area with lines of contemporary furniture offering design, quality, and value in mind, helping create living spaces to suit a range of budgets. For design and space inspiration, you can take a virtual tour of the store by visiting bovafurniture.com.
Support comes from the UC College of Medicine and UC Physicians, where early colorectal cancer screening and a nuanced approach to treatment determines the best path for each patient, from surgical solutions to less invasive approaches. Learn more at med.uc.edu/indispensable.
I'm Ann Thompson. Every day there are countless science and technology stories just waiting to be told. I look forward to discovering them and introducing you to the people who can explain how these stories might affect you and your family. Join me for Focus on Technology every Monday during Morning Edition and All Things Considered. And I'm your midday host on 91.7 WVXU.
Support comes from Westcott and Schaff Picture Framers in partnership with the Cincinnati Roller Girls, Cincinnati's amateur flat track roller derby team. The skater-owned and operated team will open its 2023 season on April 8th at Cintas Center at Xavier University. You can learn more at CincinnatiRollerGirls.com.
This is Cincinnati Edition on 91.7 WVXU. I'm Lucy May. The popularity of role-playing games spans generations of gamers from many backgrounds, but none has amassed as big a cult following as Dungeons & Dragons. There's even a Dungeons & Dragons movie coming out later this year. Joining me now to discuss the game and its resurgence in pop culture are Josh Courtney and Adrianna Porciello, co-owners of Cerberus Den. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And film critic TT Sternenzi. Thanks for sticking around, TT.
Great. Thank you. I'm glad to be here again.
Yeah. You can join the conversation by calling 513-419-7100 or emailing talk@wvxu.org. Josh, let's start with the very basics. Talk to us about what Dungeons & Dragons is. The game has been around for a long, long time, but not everybody has played it. Can you give us a kind of a brief description for folks who might not be familiar?
Yeah, in its most simple terms, it's a game about storytelling. So, like you just said before, it's the most popular, but this has been since the beginning of time, right? People sitting around a fire telling stories. It's the same idea. The difference is with this game is it allows everyone to participate instead of only one storyteller. So it's collaborative. The whole point is everyone is building the story that they're playing in.
And Adrianna, talk to us about what changed with the game's newest edition, the 5th edition that was released in 2014. I understand it really made a difference and tried to make the game more inclusive.
Yeah, I only started playing D&D about 3 years ago.
Okay.
So I've only ever known 5th edition, and it's been very streamlined. It's very easy to teach new people, teaching kids how to play.
Yeah.
It's just very more open to have different options to play.
Okay. Josh, were you playing D&D before this new edition came out?
So I've definitely been one of those nerds. I've been playing since they were little. And then just as of recently, you guys earlier mentioned the comic book nerds and movies come about. It's cool to be a nerd again. So now it's definitely here in the last few years. It's a lot different. So.
Yeah. TT, I know your history goes back a little ways with Dungeons & Dragons. Tell us about when you played and what drew you to the game initially?
Well, I mean, I think you just heard it. It was really about the storytelling. I was playing this in the early 80s. So there's a part of me that when I watch Stranger Things, I feel like I'm watching my childhood all over again because my crew of friends and I, that's what we did. We played Dungeons and Dragons. We rode bikes in the neighborhood. You know, we found ways to incorporate the ideas of the stories and the adventures that we were going on in the game. You know, it became part of our lives. And yeah, that was the really exciting part about it. And again, just that shared collaborative nature was the best thing in the world.
Yeah. Josh, I understand that the 2018 and 2019 being the game's 45th anniversary, were just huge years for sales. Why do you think that was? Why do you think there was just such this renewed interest in the game?
So back, we'll say, let's go a little bit further back. So I think it's been kind of building. So right around 2016, you mentioned Stranger Things. This is also the peak of Game of Thrones. So they're season 2, season 3. So fantasies became very much mainstream where everyone is. It's not weird and awkward to do that. It's Game of Thrones is the biggest show on television, right? So it's not awkward to talk about dragons and swords and fighting and stuff like that. So it's very easy to be like, wait, there's a game where we can come and play something like this. So that's definitely been a combination of both those things. Like you said, Stranger Things, it's nostalgia for people who've been playing a long time ago, but also kids now who see that and once again go, wow, this is something I could do. I've never heard of this game, or my dad talked about this game and they make it look cool. I want to do that. That looks like fun. So it's definitely brought young, old, a little bit of everyone to kind of experience the game again or for the first time just recently. So,
Adrianna, you mentioned that you just started playing, I think you said about 3 years ago. Yeah. What drew you in? What made you think, oh, I want to be part of this?
Well, I sort of got tricked into playing it because we played Monopoly, and my friends would do game nights every week we'd play. And it was we played Monopoly and it was 5-6 hour games. And of course, I would kick their butts and then they'd get angry. And then it got into well, let's play a game where we're working together. So we play like other type of board games like Mansions of Madness and like other board game-esque things that were cooperative. And then they were like, all right, well, how about we pull out the big game and we could play with like Cheez-Its and Goldfish and stuff. And we would play like a version of D&D that was not exactly miniatures and cool terrain.
Gotcha. Well, I like the fact that you're playing with edible stuff too.
Yeah, you kill the monster, you get to eat it.
That's good. What did you like about it that kind of drew you in and kept you playing?
It was definitely the cooperative play because, like, there's always going to be, like, that one person at the table that wants to play the thief or the rogue, and it's just like, oh, I'm going to steal your stuff from you while you're sleeping. But still, like, there's always, like, the cleric or the paladin that wants to help everybody and be the healer of the group. That's usually who I choose to be. So, like, I might not do all the damage, but I can still make sure everyone's alive at the end of the round.
Oh, that's great. TT, as I mentioned, there's this movie based on the game that's coming out. I believe it's called Dungeons and Dragons Honor Among Thieves. And this is, we're talking about this after so many of us finished watching a TV series based on a video game that ended last night, The Last of Us, the last episode. I was sorry to see it end personally. What do you make of this? What do you make of this transitioning from games to the screen? And, what does this say about where these games fit into our culture?
Well, I think in the case of Dungeons and Dragons, we need to also step back and remember this is not the first time that the game has been adapted into a film.
Oh, see, I did not realize that.
There was a film, and I can't even remember how long ago it was, but Jeremy Irons was in it, and you could tell he wasn't exactly as invested in the film and the role at the time. But there's also the idea too that when I was a kid growing up, there was The Sword and the Sorcerer. There were fantasy-based films that I remember seeing at that stage that didn't quite live up to what I had imagined in my head that the game would be or how it would translate into a film. And in part, it took some time for us to develop the technology and the narrative abilities to kind of recreate some of what people may have experienced with the game, and we're better able to do that now. And it feels like, from what I've heard from the South by Southwest reviews of the advanced screening of the film, that the filmmakers have gotten it right. They've really kind of figured out how you enter a world where you're talking about a game, and again, that cooperative nature and the aspect of it, and they've done a great job with it. I'm really looking forward to seeing it because, again, almost in much the same way that I've enjoyed the comic book films, it is about making sure that whoever's doing it, has to have that passion for whatever that original content is. And in this case, it feels like these guys have that real passion for the game. Mm-hmm. And if they've got it, then they're going to tap into all of us who have that same love for it too.
Yeah. I think we may have a bit of this trailer also to play.
Here's the thing. We're a team of thieves. And when you do this, you're bound to make enemies. Sometimes those enemies come looking for revenge. Truth be told, we helped the wrong person steal the wrong thing. We didn't mean to unleash the greatest evil the world has ever known. But we're gonna fix it.
So how do we pull that off? Figure it out over a drink?
Probably best.
Josh, does this sound like the game to you as somebody who plays it and played it? I mean, does it sound like, just from that little bit, a true adaptation?
Yeah, I mean, it about sums it up. Like we've been talking before, is usually when it's people coming together, they got some type of quest, there's some type of adventure they're going on, no different than the other movie. It's just the setting is different. So yeah, it definitely seems like it.
One of the things that makes Dungeons and Dragons such a commitment is that you have to have a dungeon master, somebody who's kind of leading the storytelling. Everybody participates, but you have to have somebody who's in that role. Can you talk about, Josh, what it takes to kind of put in that time and commitment to create that storyline and be that dungeon master.
Yeah. So like I mentioned before, this person has always existed in society, right? You have someone who's been the campfires, the stuff like that. So the person who just enjoys telling stories, legends of the past, of Greek mythology and stuff like that. And it does take a lot of prep, and I think it's some players definitely respect that, and the people who come back and understand, especially when they try it themselves and they're very overwhelmed and they're like, oh my gosh, this is more than I thought. But at the end of the day, it really is just simple storytelling. So personally, me, I do a lot of improv. So when we sit down to play, I have one sheet of paper with a couple words. I'm like, let's go. And we just do it off the cuff and play that way. So there's definitely different ways to approach it. One is very, very meticulous, where you have it planned out like a book. And the other is, oh, that's funny. And you hear someone say something, you write it down, and 20 minutes later, you bring that up again. No different than doing like a stand-up routine. Like, oh, remember earlier when I referenced that? Let's do that now. So there's definitely different approaches to being a dungeon master.
We're talking about the resurgence of the role-playing game Dungeons & Dragons. You can join the conversation by calling 513-419-7100 or emailing talk@wvxu.org. Adrianna, have you been the dungeon master before? Is that a role you've taken on?
Yes, I have done it a few times. I mostly do it for like new players and like learning how to play, or like young kids.
Gotcha. Yeah, I imagine you have to have a special skill set to help the young kids through that whole thing.
Sometimes the best thing is to just let them scream at each other for a few minutes and then just regroup every once in a while.
Yeah, that sounds kind of cathartic. So TT, I understand you are not a current player, but you have a son who's a current player. Talk about that kind of, what has it meant to you to see your son get involved in this?
It's kind of weird because I mentioned like my kids and comic books. My youngest was the one who got into comic books, and was also the one that we would play games together, Monopoly, Risk. We did all of this stuff together, and my wife and my son were not interested in any of it. So I was a little surprised, but it sounds like my son's experience is similar to how you guys have described your experiences too, in that he kind of came into it by accident. His friends group would get together once a week. They would play games, and he was kind of like, I'll try this out. I'll see what it's like. And now he is fully invested in it. And it's really funny to me because I haven't played in over 30 years. But when I hear him talk about it, I'm feeling that same kind of excitement that I remember having back in the day. And I'm kind of like, wow, like maybe I should get back into this. Maybe I should check this out. So,
kind of transported back.
Yeah.
I want to ask you one more question about the movie, TT. You were talking about people being just really invested in, having the people who make the movie know a lot about this game and be really passionate about the game. Talk to us too about the casting. How important is that? Because these are very popular characters, and I'm sure that different players, different people who are film goers will have very specific ideas of who they would see in these different roles.
Sure. I mean, in the first two that come to mind for me are, again, Chris Pine, who is kind of the leader of this team. It feels like he's playing off of his image as, again, we know him as Captain Kirk from the Star Trek films. He's got a kind of roguish kind of charm to him anyway, which I think he's going to do a good job of kind of playing off that. But the real surprise for me is actually Michelle Rodriguez. We've seen her in the Fast and Furious films and things like that, and she's kind of playing the heavy in this film. And I've seen her in person doing interviews at a junket before, and I have to say, she scared the devil out of me when I saw her in person. So I'm kind of like, yeah, she's probably very well suited to the role that she's going to have in this film, and I'm excited to see what she does with it. It should be a lot of fun for her. And again, I think being able to lean into that part of her screen persona is going to be something that if it works well, I'm sure she probably had an amazing time doing it.
Yeah. Josh, we did get an email from Randy, and Randy emails, how can a newbie get into the game? What are your recommendations?
So the first is, like everyone, they both alluded to, is being tricked in. That sounds so awful, but I guess going with no preconceived notions of, I get asked all the time when people come play at our store for the first time, like, what do I need? The answer is nothing. And I think that's one of the beauties too, in general, of joining Dungeons & Dragons for the first time or even long term, of to really get invested doesn't mean hundreds of dollars. It doesn't mean hours and hours of practice. It means just coming with the intent of having fun. So that's the first thing I would say is, look, the winner of Dungeons and Dragons is everyone, because if the whole group makes it, then you make it. It's not the individual winner. So that would be step one. But there's game stores all over the United States that have options for people to come play. And it's actually a big initiative. They're on here with the movie coming out as well. Even in schools, that's another thing too. That's actually how I got started. Back in 6th grade, we had strategy gaming club, and different schools have options of something like that too, where it's definitely broadened from chess club. It's more a little bit of everything.
Yeah.
When you come in, just like I said, everyone takes care of everybody, because you don't have to, it doesn't matter if you've been playing for years or if it's your first day, you can jump in day one and you would never know any different.
Yeah. And your store, you've got nights or days or whatever where people can come in and sit around a table and just play together.
Yeah. So our store is a little unique. So I said other stores do this, but what's unique about ours is we host Dungeons and Dragons for basically over 100 people every week. And when I say host, it's not as simple as, you can go play at that table over there, which is what other stores might do. Is with ours, it's very much we're the host. So we make sure we have the dungeon masters. We have the fancy painted miniatures and terrain. That's a big part of what Adrianna does. And it's making sure that when you come up to play, we're ready for you. And you can sit down. You don't need a whole group of people. You can just come as yourself or come with a group of people, and we're ready to go. So.
Yeah. And Adrianna, we talked a little bit about this, but let's talk about whether it's inclusive, because I think some people would be like, oh, this is for guys, or maybe specifically, oh, this is for white guys. Like, how inclusive has this game become?
Especially like for me, it's more of like, do we have a spot at the table? Yes, sit down. So I haven't seen too much of an issue where like, oh no, you're not allowed here, or like it's a closed community. It's very much the opposite, where everybody wants more players, because it always makes the game more fun with the more voices, the more monsters that are on the table because of it. And it's definitely one of those, just like, the more people have different opinions, the more fun the game becomes.
And TT, there are some really racial issues with this game. There's been controversy over the year. The man who created Dungeons and Dragons described himself as a biological determinist who believed that different races were biologically distinct and capable of different things. Have you ever, I know you haven't played for years, but do you think did that present some problems with the foundation of the game that the creators had to address, or that gamers have to address going into it?
I don't remember that being a problem in my case growing up. And I think part of what made that less of an issue for us is, again, it was the shared storytelling and the ability for everyone to kind of come together. I had a really diverse friend group, and we all knew and kind of thought about our characters as we were creating them. And we found ways to make those characters feel like us. So we didn't ever have a problem with it. And again, I was kind of thinking about the Oscars last night and hearing Michelle Yeoh talk about the idea of, yes, she's hoping that, the young boys and girls out there that look like her are going to see what she did and know that they can do it too. I think for me as a kid growing up playing Dungeons and Dragons, that was the Dungeons and Dragons world that I was in, and my friend group, we saw ourselves because we made characters that looked like us. And we made sure that those adventures kind of incorporated some of that worldview that we all had. So it was the place where we could be ourselves.
Josh, is that one of the benefits of the game, that you can really bring yourself and your experiences into it because you're helping to write the story?
Yeah, but then the beauty of it, because the game is so loose, it's not very strict rules, you can do the complete opposite. So I know many people that come in and, hi, I am a 5-foot tall girl. When I come to play, I'm playing an 8-foot tall man half orc. So it's like you can literally do whatever you want. So the whole point of it is to escape. So you can bring, like you mentioned, like your perspective is, well, we have a little bit of ourselves in everyone. Some people are like she mentioned earlier, the rogue who wants to take the people's stuff in the night. It's like, okay, well, obviously that's not acceptable in real life, but hey, we can have fun with do that in a game, because there's no consequence in something like that. So people can literally do whatever they want. That's the beauty of it. And when someone sits down, go back to what we were saying earlier, when you first come to play for the first time, You tell me what you want to play, and then we'll figure out what rules to follow to make that happen. It's not the other way around, where you're in a strict box and you have to play this role. It's you do whatever you want. We'll make the rules work for you.
Yeah. And Adrianna, I think some people have the impression of Dungeons and Dragons as still pretty patriarchal, that the guys are kind of in charge. Is that the case, or is that not the case?
I mean, going back to like the archaic mentality of what D&D is usually based around, where it's like the king and the queen, there's still like some of that, but it's still, it doesn't matter if you're male or female, or if you're playing the half-orc or you're playing the dragonborn. It's just, you're playing what you want to play. You might kill the king, you might save the prince, you don't know.
Gotcha. So you can kind of tailor your whatever you want your character to be. It doesn't matter if that reflects your own identity in real life.
Yeah, it's usually like really fun to swap characters and stuff, especially when we do like one-shots where it doesn't transfer over to the next session you play. It's just entirely different stuff.
Yeah. We got an email from Christopher. He writes, I played D&D casually in the early 80s. When COVID hit, a friend of mine in Atlanta put together a D&D group every Friday night. We've been playing for 3 years now, and it's really how to get through the pandemic as well as reconnect. Josh, what did you see with that? Do you think the pandemic through the lockdown brought people together online, but now I'm thinking they were getting together more in person? Are you seeing this hunger for people to be able to come to a place where they can get together with other humans in a space and play a game?
Yeah. So going back to 2020, that's actually when we started the business, was in 2020.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, everyone was literally itching, just like it, no matter what your hobby was, of like, I got to get out of this house. And a lot of people started playing online, and it got to the point where websites and all the things that existed couldn't handle it, and it got out of control. Like servers were crashing and stuff like that. But then, yeah, so no different than anything else. Once the doors got open, everyone's like, not COVID is gone, but basically everyone's free to go back out again. People are urging and like they want to be around other humans again, and there's no better way to do that than Dungeons and Dragons, because it's the whole point is to get together with other people. No different than people getting together to go to a restaurant or something else like that.
Yeah. Well, and just real quickly, we're running out of time because of you hear the music that's playing, but do you think Dungeons and Dragons will be the dominant one of these games for the long term? Can anything usurp it?
I don't think so. There's many other games like it, but I mean, it's Dungeons and Dragons. It's the name.
One
People
D&D.
love it.
There you go. Well, I've been talking with Josh Courtney and Adrianna Porciello, co-owners of Cerberus Den, and film critic T.T. Stern-Enzi. Thank you all so much for your time today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You've been listening to Cincinnati Edition on 91.7 WVXU. Our producer is Selena Reeder. Associate producer is Asia Johnson. Technical director today is Stephen Baum. Thank you, Stephen. Rob Fetters composed our theme music. And if you miss our program live, you can subscribe to Cincinnati Edition wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Lucy May. Thanks for listening. I'm Lucy May. On the next Cincinnati Edition, Governor Andy Beshear's executive order to partly legalize medical marijuana is in effect